I walked up to my daughter's porch after being robbed, hoping for shelter. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "This isn't your home anymore." Her husband turned off the porch light, leaving me in the dark. The sting wasn't just her words, it was losing the only place I thought I still belonged. But what they didn't know was that I kept quiet while preparing a plan that would change everything in court. When the judge slammed the gavel, it wasn't me who lost, it was them. Follow my story until the end, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The night air carried the smell of damp leaves as I walked slowly up the driveway to my daughter's house. My shoes scuffed against the pavement, each step heavier than the last. After the robbery, after the shouting and the fear, I had clung to one thought, that Carla's porch light would still mean safety. The glow from inside spilled through the curtains, warm and golden, a promise of shelter I longed for. This house had once felt like an extension of my own roots. I remembered sanding the porch railings years ago when Carla and Dean first bought it. I had carried boxes up those steps, thinking it would be a place where family dinners and laughter grew. Tonight, I carried only a small overnight bag and the fragile hope that blood still meant belonging. When Carla opened the door, the heat from inside brushed my face, but her expression was cold. I cleared my throat, my voice small, careful not to sound like a burden. "Carla, I just need a few nights. I don't feel safe at home right now." Her arms folded across her chest, and she leaned against the doorframe. Dean stood behind her, silent, his eyes like closed shutters. For a moment, I thought she might soften, that she might remember the father who once worked double shifts so she could have dance lessons. Instead, her words came sharp, with no hesitation. "This isn't your home anymore." The sentence cut deeper than the knife the robber had waved at me earlier. At least that threat had been from a stranger. This one came from my own blood. The porch seemed to tilt beneath me, the air growing thinner. Before I could gather myself, a delivery man walked up the path carrying 2 grocery bags. He caught Carla's words, paused, and shifted awkwardly, his eyes dropping to the ground. The humiliation burned hotter than the night chill, not only cast aside by my daughter, but shamed in front of someone who would likely forget my face by morning. Dean stepped forward, flicking the porch light off without a word. Darkness swallowed me, leaving only the sound of plastic bags rustling as the delivery man hurried away. Carla showed no sign of regret. She simply tightened her robe, her mouth a straight line. I stood trembling, but not from the cold. My breath came shallow, my chest heavy with disbelief. The robbery had taken my wallet and the last of my savings, but her words stripped me bare in a way no thief could. Across the street, Harvey Dillinger, the neighbor, stood on his lawn with his hands in his pockets. He didn't speak, only watched, his eyes holding a silent knowledge I couldn't quite place. The bag in my hand felt impossibly heavy. My knees ached as I turned from the porch, each step down the stairs echoing louder than the last. Behind me, the door closed with a hard, final click. That sound, firm and cold, rang louder in my ears than the robber's gun ever had. "If this isn't my home," I whispered to no one, "then what do I have left?" The night answered only with silence. My path stretched toward the dim glow of the road, leading me not to family, but to a motel where loneliness would wait like an unwelcome companion. The neon motel sign blinked outside the window, its tired red glow slicing through the blinds in uneven beats. I dragged my overnight bag across the stained carpet, every step echoing louder than it should have in a room meant for temporary souls. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and the bedspread looked as if it had outlived better years. Dropping the bag onto the chair, I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. There had been a time when a house full of warm light waited for me after a long day. Tonight, all I had was this dim, rented room, and the truth that I'd been turned away by my own daughter. The robbery had left me shaken, but this loneliness, this exile, was something deeper. It wasn't the room that felt foreign. It was the fact that nowhere seemed like home anymore. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the springs protesting beneath me. A part of me reached for something familiar, something steady. Slowly, I unzipped the bag, searching for Evelyn. She was gone 10 years now, but her presence lived in small keepsakes, the silver locket she wore every Sunday, the framed photo I kept on my dresser. They had been anchors when the nights turned too long. My fingers dug through the bag, shirts, socks, shaving kit. But the anchors weren't there. Panic crawled up my spine. I emptied everything onto the bed. Each item a disappointment. The locket, the photo, gone. My breath caught. Carla had been reorganizing the drawers not long ago, insisting she'd make things easier for me. My heart told me the truth. She hadn't just reorganized. She had taken Evelyn from me, piece by piece. A thief on the street had stolen my wallet, but my own daughter had stolen my memories, and the theft cut deeper. I reached for the motel phone, my hands shaking. Dialing Carla's house number was like walking into fire, but I needed to know. The line rang, long and hollow, before the voicemail answered. "You've reached the Lasker residence. Leave a message." Dean's voice. No mention of me. No sign I had ever lived there. My throat tightened. Once I had been the voice of that house, the father, the owner, the name on the deed. Now, I wasn't even a footnote. I set the phone down, staring at it as though it had spoken back. A house can stop being a home in an instant, but hearing your name erased, it was like being erased yourself. Reaching into my coat pocket, I pulled out a thin stack of mail forwarded from the post office. Habit, bills, notices, envelopes I hadn't bothered to open. Tonight, I opened them. The electric bill, Carla Harlow. The water bill, Carla Harlow. The bank statement, her name, not mine. My name was missing, replaced, as though I had never existed in those walls. The words blurred as I gripped the paper. I whispered to no one. Paper cuts cut deepest when they slice away your name. The motel's silence pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just rejection anymore. It was erasure, written in ink, sealed in envelopes. I sat at the desk in the corner. The bills spread before me like a sentence. The lamp hummed, casting a yellow glow that made the room feel smaller. My hands trembled, clutching the envelope tighter than I realized. If they can erase my name on a bill, I muttered, they can erase me everywhere. The words barely left my mouth when a sharp knock rattled the door. I froze. Breath caught in my throat. For a heartbeat, fear gripped me. Was it the robber? Had he followed me here? Or worse, had Carla sent someone? The knock came again, steady, deliberate. I stood slowly, heart pounding, the bills still in my hand. The knock on the motel door wasn't sharp, but steady enough to stir a cold rush through the chest. Standing there was Harvey Dillinger, his old neighbor, holding a flash drive between his fingers as though it weighed more than gold. His eyes shifted uneasily toward the dim hallway, then back to me. "Lester," he said softly. I thought you should see this. Didn't feel right keeping it to myself. There was shame rising like heat, shame at being seen this way, in a place like this, after being turned away from the very home that once anchored everything. Still, curiosity pried the door open wider. Harvey's hand trembled slightly as he offered the flash drive. "Something strange on my camera last night," he added. The room behind me smelled of bleach and damp carpet, hardly the setting to accept a neighbor's kindness. I grabbed my coat, nodded stiffly, and agreed to ride with him. The silence in his truck was thick, but it carried something steadier than the motel walls ever could. Harvey's living room smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old cedar. It wasn't grand, but the warmth seeped into the bones. The armchair cushions sagged with years of loyalty, and a lamp glowed warmly in the corner. "Sit," he said, motioning me toward the couch. "Neighbors don't close doors on each other, least, not the ones worth keeping." The words settled heavier than they looked. For the first time since leaving Carla's porch, there was no sense of being watched with suspicion. Instead, there was patience, quiet loyalty, like a steadying hand. We spoke lightly at first. Weather, the stubborn maple tree in his yard, but the unspoken truth hung between us. The television screen came alive as Harvey slid the flash drive into his old laptop. The footage showed familiar angles of my house, captured by his porch camera across the street. At first, nothing but shadows. Then Dean, my son-in-law, stepping across the yard, his arms full of boxes. Back and forth he went, long after midnight, loading his car with pieces of what once filled my rooms. The gut clenched hard. Proof of what was feared but not seen. It wasn't a stranger with a crowbar. It wasn't a burglar looking for a quick grab. It was family, stripping away memory with each trip across the lawn. My home wasn't robbed by strangers. The thought cut deep. It was gutted by the people I trusted most. Harvey paused the screen, his eyes sliding toward me but saying nothing. He didn't have to. While the footage replayed, my hand slipped toward the phone. Old habit, seeking some contact, some thread of connection. The family group chat blinked empty. My name was gone. No messages, no updates. Nothing but silence where once there had been Maisie's birthday pictures, holiday plans, little notes from Carla, removed. Erased, as if my presence had never mattered. Scrolling down, there were still unread messages from Maisie. The only tether that felt unbroken, a picture of a school project, a little goodnight, Grandpa, weeks back. Those were the fragments clung to, even as everything else fell away. Symbolism hit harder than the footage. No place in the home, no place even in the pocket-sized version of family life. If they can erase me from a group, the whisper barely rose. They can erase me from the family altogether. The screen froze again, Dean holding a box, taped and marked with my wife's name. That handwriting had once been hers, labeling holiday ornaments. Now it was carried off under cover of night. A hand landed firm on the shoulder. Harvey's voice was quiet, measured. You'll need more than proof. Lester, you'll need allies. The glow of the paused footage lingered on Dean's figure, mid-step, carrying away more than cardboard. Carrying away the last threads of belonging, and with that image burning into memory, it was clear the fight ahead would be not only about possessions, but about erasure itself. The morning crept in through the flimsy curtains of the motel room, pale light painting the walls in a way that made the place feel even smaller than it was. Sleep had been thin, broken by the images Harvey showed me just hours earlier. Dean sneaking through the dark, my belongings boxed up like forgotten junk. Those shadows clung to me as I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes untied, wondering if I was the fool for still hoping to salvage something of my wife's memory. The bag at my feet looked emptier than it should, a man's whole life crammed into a worn canvas sack. But it wasn't the clothes or toiletries that mattered. What mattered was what had been taken. The ring, the locket, the framed photo. Proof that she and I had lived, loved, and built a life together. Proof that I was not yet erased. By mid-morning, I found myself downtown, walking beneath a flickering neon pawn sign. The air carried a hint of damp leaves, a reminder of how the season was closing in. Inside, the shop was brighter than I expected, harsh fluorescent lights humming above glass cases lined with other people's abandoned treasures, old guitars, mismatched wedding china, class rings long separated from the fingers they once honored. It felt like walking through a graveyard. Only the headstones had price tags. And then I saw it. Her wedding ring sat in a velvet tray under the glass, a small circle of gold that once symbolized everything steady and unbreakable in my life. My throat tightened. That ring had rested on Evelyn's hand for over 40 years. I remembered slipping it on her finger the day we promised forever. Now it lay on display, its story reduced to numbers on a sticker. I tapped on the glass, my hand trembling. The young clerk shuffled over, chewing gum, eyes barely lifting from his phone. That one, I managed, pointing at the ring. Where did it come from? He shrugged, flipping open a logbook. Guy sold it last night. Tall, dark jacket, kinda in a hurry. Left cash on the counter. He looked up just long enough to add, sounded like Dean Lasker. You know him? The name hit me like a second robbery. Dean, my son-in-law, the man who stood silent while Carla told me I didn't belong. The clerk waited for my reaction, uninterested beyond making a sale. I nodded, forcing a calm I didn't feel. Yeah, I whispered. I know him. They hadn't just taken from me. They hadn't just stripped my place in the house. They were cashing in my grief, turning Evelyn's memory into a dollar figure. That realization hollowed me deeper than any stranger with a weapon could have. I left the shop empty-handed. The door's bell jingled as if mocking me on my way out. Outside, the city went on as though nothing had happened. Cars honking, people carrying shopping bags, kids chasing each other on the sidewalk, life continuing, while mine had been gutted quietly. Piece by piece. Back in the motel, the silence was unbearable. The plastic lamp cast a dim glow that did nothing to warm the room. The clock ticked too loudly, each second hammering home the thought that I was living nowhere, belonging nowhere. I sat at the desk staring at my reflection in the darkened television screen. Lines etched deep around my eyes, hair thinning, shoulders sagging. An old man living in exile. If they've sold her ring, I muttered into the stillness, what's left worth fighting for? The question echoed in the stale air. My chest felt heavy, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to crush me. Outside the thin walls, laughter erupted from another room, a couple sharing jokes, glasses clinking. Their joy seeped through like salt on a wound. It reminded me how foreign warmth and closeness had become. I lay back on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling's cracked plaster. Words circled in my head. Erased, forgotten, sold. Each one carved a little deeper. I whispered to the empty room, I am living like a stranger in the town I built my life in. Then the phone buzzed. The sound jolted me upright. The screen glowed with an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I almost let it ring out. My hand hovered, uncertain. Curiosity, or maybe desperation, pushed me to swipe and press it to my ear. Grandpa? The voice was small, trembling, mazy. That single word cut through the fog like sunlight breaking a storm. My chest clenched, but this time not from despair. Hope, fragile, faint, but alive, flickered inside me. Maisie, I whispered, my voice catching. Her next words carried both fear and love, the only tether I had left. Are you okay? The motel room was dark, except for the buzzing neon that crept in through the thin curtains. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, its sudden noise startling me. An unfamiliar number glowed on the screen. For a moment I considered letting it ring, assuming it was some wrong call, but then, against my better judgment, I picked it up. Grandpa? The voice was faint, trembling, mazy. Every muscle in me stiffened. She was whispering, as though someone might overhear. Grandpa, I can't talk long. Mom and Dean, they're saying things. I heard them last night. Her voice cracked, and the air in that little motel room seemed to thin. They're planning to sell your house. They said once the papers are signed, you'll have nothing left. They laughed about how fast it'll go. The words hit harder than the robber's shove days before. My house, every nail, every window pane, was more than wood and paint. It was my life with Evelyn, my late wife. Memories stitched into its walls. To imagine it bartered off like junk at a yard sale made my hands shake. Maisie, I whispered back, my throat dry. Thank you for telling me, but you have to be careful. Don't let them catch you doing this. I know, she breathed. I don't want them to hurt you. Grandpa. Then the line went dead, silence heavy in my ears. I set the phone down slowly, as though it were made of glass. The motel hum returned, the old heater clicking, the neon buzzing, footsteps in the hallway. But inside, my chest felt hollowed out. Shame pressed in. What kind of grandfather involves a child in battles meant for adults? And yet, gratitude warmed me too. She had risked herself for me. Pulling a small notebook from my bag, I opened to a blank page, with a pen that scratched more than it wrote. I put down Evelyn's name, just the letters of her name. I stared at them until they blurred, grounding myself in something they could never erase. By morning, resolve had hardened. I couldn't keep hiding in this motel room while they stripped me of everything. So I walked the few miles back toward Carla's house. The autumn wind sharp against my face. The house looked the same as always, its porch neat, the lawn clipped. But it felt different now, like enemy ground. Dean stood near the truck in the driveway, leaning against it with a smirk he didn't bother to hide. Carla met me in the yard, her arms folded tight, eyes cold. "What do you want now, Dad?" she asked, voice flat. "I want answers," I said. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. "You're selling the house, aren't you?" Her lips tightened, then curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "The house is mine now. Stop clinging to the past." "You don't live there anymore." The words stung, but it was the calm certainty in her tone that cut deepest. Dean chuckled low in his throat, still leaning. "Carla," I said, "that house is more than a deed. It's your mother's memory. It's my life's work. And you want to cash it out like a prize cow." Her eyes narrowed. She stepped closer, her voice sharpening. "If you interfere, Dad, I'll make sure the courts see you as unfit, old, forgetful, unable to take care of yourself. Don't test me." The air went still. The threat wasn't hidden anymore. It was plain and sharp as broken glass. Dean nodded, satisfied. I felt my knees weaken, but I forced my spine straight. My hands trembled, yet my voice came out steady. "This isn't finished." Turning, I walked away from that yard. Each step felt like dragging chains, but each step was mine, not theirs. Behind me, the sound of the front door slamming shut echoed through the quiet neighborhood. As I reached the sidewalk, I turned my head just slightly. Through the window, Maisie stood, her small hand pressed against the glass. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. That silent gesture said everything: loyalty, fear, hope. The morning light washed over me as I moved down the street, carrying her promise with me. The office smelled faintly of old paper and coffee gone cold. Rebecca Quall's name was etched in neat brass letters on the glass door, and stepping inside, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. Her desk was orderly, her bookshelves lined with thick law volumes, and behind it all sat a woman who looked as though she had spent a lifetime telling people truths they didn't want to hear. She gestured for me to sit, and I lowered myself into the chair across from her, clutching the strap of my bag like a lifeline. My voice came out rough as I began to tell her what had happened. The robbery, Carla's words on the porch, the pawn shop with Evelyn's ring, the threat she hurled at me yesterday. I spoke slowly, each word heavy, as though speaking them aloud made them more real. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her pen scratching across a yellow pad. There was no pity in her eyes, but something steadier, professional focus, a determination that steadied my own shaking hands. When I finished, she leaned back, adjusted her glasses, and said, "Mr. Brandt, I think it's time you see what I found." She turned to her computer, clicked through public records, and then slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of filings I'd never seen before. My heart lurched as I scanned the pages. Carla and Dean had already submitted paperwork to transfer ownership of my house. The signature wasn't mine. My name was misspelled, the letters jagged as though written by someone who had never cared to know me properly. That tiny error screamed louder than any of Carla's cruel words. It was deliberate, and I knew it. A cold weight sank in my stomach. "They've already started," I whispered, my throat tight. "They're not just trying to push me out. They're erasing me." Rebecca leaned forward, her tone even but urgent. "That's not all. These filings are incomplete, but they're a start. If they build on this, and if they can persuade a court you're not competent to manage your own affairs, they might succeed." Her words stung worse than any insult Carla had thrown at me. Not competent. Carla had warned me, threatened me with that exact phrase. Now I could see how easily it could be used against me. Rebecca tapped her pen. "You must not confront them rashly. If you explode in anger, they'll use it as evidence. The courts look at paper, not pain." What you need is documentation, witnesses, and a clear record of your stability. I sat back, her words ringing in my ears. Anger boiled under my ribs. But I knew she was right. Every outburst, every tremble in my voice could become a weapon for them. I thought of Evelyn, of how she used to tell me to pause before speaking when I was riled up. Now her advice might be the only thing keeping me from losing everything she and I had built together. Later that evening, I returned to the motel. The neon light buzzed outside, bleeding red through the blinds. I spread Rebecca's folder on the cheap desk and stared at the papers until the lines blurred. Maisie's whisper still echoed in my mind. Once the papers are signed, you'll have nothing. She was only a child, yet she was the only one who dared to tell me the truth. I switched on the small lamp by the bed. Its weak glow didn't reach the corners of the room. Shadows gathered there, pressing in, but the light was enough to keep me from breaking. I picked up a pen and wrote Evelyn's name on the back of an envelope, as though seeing it in ink could anchor me against the storm. The clock ticked loud in the silence. My pulse followed its rhythm, steadying. I knew then that I couldn't fight this war alone. I reached for the phone, my hand trembling just slightly, and dialed the only number I could trust. When Harvey's voice answered, low and cautious, I whispered, Harvey, I need a witness. Tomorrow, will you stand with me? There was a pause on the line, just long enough for doubt to creep in, before he said simply, You know I will. Relief washed through me. For the first time in days, I didn't feel entirely alone. I closed the blinds, cradled the phone in my hand, and whispered into the dark, Then maybe I still have a chance. Carla's call came in the afternoon. Her voice clipped and flat. She insisted we needed a family talk at her house that evening. The words alone made my gut tighten. Nothing about it felt like reconciliation. It felt like a summons. Walking up her driveway, the porch light was already on, throwing a sterile glow across the siding. Maisie opened the door before Carla could. Her face lit up, and for a fleeting second the heaviness in my chest eased. She hugged me quickly, whispering, I'm glad you came. That little moment of warmth steadied my legs before the storm. Carla stood behind her, arms crossed, lips tight. Dean was a shadow just inside, the kind that seemed to feed on silence. They led me into the living room, a space that once held birthday balloons and Christmas wrapping paper, but now felt like a courtroom. Carla wasted no time. She slid a folder across the coffee table toward me. Dad, these are medical notes, she said, her tone rehearsed. You've had memory issues for years. I think it's time you stopped pretending. I stared at the papers, my eyes locking on a letterhead from a clinic I'd never visited. Phrases like possible cognitive decline jumped out in bold. My throat tightened. No doctor had ever told me I was losing my memory. The idea that my own daughter would invent such a thing, it was a betrayal I hadn't thought she'd sink to. Carla, I said slowly, voice trembling more from disbelief than anger. I have never been tested for anything like this, you know that. She didn't flinch. Maybe you just don't remember, Dad. The words landed like a knife twist. Before I could gather a reply, Dean stepped forward with a manila envelope. He pulled out a set of papers, laying them next to Carla's stack. Your finances, he said casually, like announcing the weather. Bank statements show you've been draining accounts. Zero balance, late fees, irresponsible behavior. He tapped the page where a $0 balance was highlighted. And my chest burned. These weren't just false. They were crafted to humiliate. Anger bubbled up hot. But Rebecca's warning replayed in my mind. Don't let them push you into rage. Stay steady. The calm one is often the credible one. I drew a breath, lifted my eyes from the lies on the table, and said, If I were as reckless as you claim, I wouldn't have raised a family under this roof for decades. You can wave paper all you like, but truth doesn't change with ink. Carla's voice rose, sharp, accusing, while Dean leaned back, arms folded smugly. The room shook with her words, yet the more she pressed, the calmer I forced myself to appear. From the corner of my eye, a small hand slipped something into mine. Maisie. She had slid me a folded scrap of notebook paper. her face careful not to draw attention. When I opened it, scrawled in her childish handwriting were the words, "I believe you, Grandpa." The walls that had closed in suddenly loosened, if only by an inch. That note felt heavier than all their paperwork. Carla's final blow came as I stood to leave. "I've scheduled a legal hearing," she declared, her voice cutting like the snap of a gavel. "The court will decide if you're competent to handle your affairs. You can't stop it." Outside, the night was cold, the porch light shut off behind me, just as Dean had done before, casting me into darkness once again. My hands trembled as I clutched Maisie's note, but my voice was steady as I whispered to the empty street. "If they want to fight in court, they'll have it." The evening air felt thick as I walked up the path to Carla's house once again. This time, though, I wasn't coming alone. Rebecca Qualls had insisted on being present, and though her presence gave me a sense of quiet reassurance, it also meant the stakes were higher. Carla had called it a family discussion, but the word rang hollow. Families didn't gather to tear each other apart. Inside, the living room looked staged, as if for a performance. Dean sat in the corner, his arms crossed, projecting the role of a dutiful husband, while Maisie perched on the couch, her little frame nearly swallowed by the cushions. She glanced at me with eyes that flickered with relief, but quickly dropped her gaze as Carla swept in, carrying a stack of papers. "Dad," she began with a voice that carried false patience, "this is for your own good. You're not managing things the way you used to. It's time we make sure everything's in order." The stack of papers landed on the coffee table like a gavel. I could see the highlighted lines and bold signatures waiting to trap me. Rebecca leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing. Carla pushed the documents closer. "If you sign, you won't have to worry about bills, property taxes, or any of that. Dean and I will handle it all. You can just rest." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were steel. Dean placed a hand on her shoulder, nodding, the smirk he couldn't quite hide tugging at his lips. I sat back, letting the silence weigh down the room. "Finally," I said, "I've managed this long without handing my life over. I won't be signing a thing." Carla's smile cracked. "You're being stubborn. Dad, this is about protecting you. You don't want to embarrass yourself when—" Before she could finish, the front door creaked open. Everyone turned. A woman stepped in, her heels clicking against the hardwood. Shelley Vanner, the real estate agent, looked uneasy, holding a slim folder in her hands. I shouldn't even be here," she said, her voice wavering, "but I can't keep quiet." She glanced at me, then at Rebecca. "Weeks ago, Carla and Dean contacted me to appraise your house. They told me you'd already agreed to sell, but something about it didn't feel right. I backed out. Now, hearing about this meeting." Her words sliced through the room like glass shattering. Carla's face drained of color, then flushed with rage. "You had no right to come here," she snapped. Shelley tightened her grip on the folder. "Maybe not, but I wasn't going to let you railroad your own father." Rebecca calmly reached for the folder, her lips pressed in a tight line. "Thank you, Ms. Vanner. This will be important." Dean shifted in his seat, the smirk gone now, replaced by a scowl. He opened his mouth to retaliate, but before he could, another voice joined in. "I have something too." Harvey Dillinger stepped forward from the doorway. His shoulders were broad, his voice steady, his presence almost unexpected in this heated storm. I saw Dean sneaking into Lester's house at night, carrying boxes, slipping out the back. My camera caught it all. The room went silent. Carla shook her head furiously. "You're lying. This is all lies." But Harvey's calmness was unshakable. "You know it's true, and I've kept the recordings." Maisie gasped softly, covering her mouth, her eyes darting to me, wide with both fear and hope. Rebecca finally stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. "With this testimony and proof, the court will hear your side. Lester, they'll see through this charade." For the first time in weeks, something inside me straightened, like a tree bracing against the wind, but refusing to break. Carla's mask of control slipped. Her eyes turned sharp and cold as she leaned into Dean and whispered, "Not softly enough. Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't make it to court." Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. I rose slowly, feeling the gravity of the moment press against my chest. The battle wasn't over, it had just begun. The courthouse steps felt heavier than any hill I'd ever climbed. My shoes scraped against the stone, and though the autumn morning was crisp, heat flushed up my neck. Whispers drifted through the hallway before I even reached the courtroom doors. "That's him," someone muttered. "Carla said he forgot his own address the other night." Another voice. "Dean told me he wanders around at night. Confused. Poor old man." The words weren't shouted, but they struck harder than any blow. The robbery weeks ago hadn't left bruises like this. My own daughter and her husband had carried my name into the street and left it there, dirtied for everyone to trample on. I kept my head high, though inside a question gnawed. How many of them believed it already? Inside the courtroom, the air smelled of polish and paper. The judge adjusted his glasses, while Carla sat across from me, neatly dressed, hair pulled back tight. She folded her hands like a dutiful daughter, but her eyes flashed with calculation. Dean leaned close to her, whispering something that made the corner of her mouth twitch. Her lawyer rose first. "Your Honor," he began, voice smooth as oil. "This is not a case of malice but concern. Mr. Brandt has shown clear signs of mental decline, forgetting addresses, leaving appliances on, wandering at odd hours. These medical notes," he held up a sheaf of papers, "confirm our worries." I felt a knot twist in my gut. Notes, evaluations. I had never once sat in a doctor's office for memory tests. Yet there, in black ink, were words claiming I had. Seeing my own daughter nod solemnly as though it were truth nearly buckled my knees. Dean sat back, lips pressed in a smug line. Maisie sat behind them, shoulders hunched, eyes flicking from her mother to me. She wanted to speak, I could see it, but fear held her tongue. I swallowed down my anger. Rebecca's warning echoed in my mind. Stay calm, don't rise to their bait. When it was our turn, Rebecca stood, straight-backed, her voice firm. "Your Honor, concern for a parent should not come at the cost of truth. These claims are not only unfounded, they are contradicted by evidence." She laid a folder on the desk, sliding out bank records. "Here are logs showing Mrs. Lasker accessed Mr. Brandt's personal accounts without his authorization." The room stirred, heads bent together, whispers cutting the air. Carla's face froze, color draining from her cheeks. Dean shifted in his chair, tapping his foot too fast. A crack in his calm act. For the first time since all this began, I felt a flicker of balance tip my way. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I simply sat steady, letting Rebecca's words carry weight that mine no longer could. By afternoon the session was over. Nothing was decided yet, but the lies no longer stood alone. Back in the motel that evening, exhaustion pressed against my bones. The neon sign buzzed outside, painting the room in sickly red light. I spread the court papers on the desk, pen in hand, and wrote in my notebook, "Truth has legs, lies need crutches." The muted TV flickered in the corner, pictures moving without sound. It reminded me of my silence in the face of their stories. Silent, but not voiceless. Sometime past midnight, a shuffle outside my door broke the stillness. An envelope slid under with a faint scrape. I bent to pick it up, hands trembling before I even read the words. In block letters it said, "Drop the case or you won't make it to the next hearing." The motel lamp hummed above me, throwing long shadows across the page. For a moment I listened to the blood thudding in my ears. Then, slowly, I straightened. My voice, hoarse but steady, filled the empty room. "If this is war, I'll see it through." The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and coffee as the second day of hearings began. I sat at the table beside Rebecca, clutching my worn notebook as though it were a shield. Across the room, Carla walked in with a burst of confidence, her heels striking the floor like a drumbeat of defiance. Dean hovered close, leaning in to whisper encouragement, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. Carla lifted a folder high for the judge to see. "Your Honor," she began, her voice smooth but edged with steel, "we have additional documentation, Medical notes. Evaluations that show my father's memory has been failing for years. The words hit like stones. My chest tightened, though I kept my face steady. They wanted to strip me down, not just of my house or my dignity, but of my very mind. I heard the shuffle of papers as Rebecca took the file, her brow furrowing almost instantly. The judge glanced toward us. "Counselor, do you wish to review?" Rebecca rose, calm, composed. Her voice carried a quiet authority. "Yes, Your Honor, I have a few questions for the witness and about the origins of these records." Carla's posture stiffened, but she held her smile. Rebecca flipped through the so-called medical notes, tapping the signature line. "Mrs. Harlow, are you aware the attending physician listed here retired in 2015? She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "And yet this evaluation is dated 2018. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I felt the first flicker of light pierce through the fog of their lies. Dean leaned forward, whispering something urgent into Carla's ear, but Rebecca pressed on. "And these notes, they reference medications Mr. Brandt has never been prescribed. In fact," she tapped the page again, "the handwriting in the margins looks suspiciously similar to yours." Gasps spread. Carla's face flushed red, the mask slipping just enough for everyone to see the cracks. She stammered something about clerical errors, but the judge's eyes hardened, no longer patient. Then Harvey Dillinger stood up from the back row. His presence had been quiet until now, but his voice carried clearly across the room. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, stepping forward when the judge permitted. Harvey adjusted his cap, speaking plain and true. "I live across the street from Lester. I saw Dean sneaking documents out of the house. I saw Carla with him, late at night, going over papers in the driveway under their porch light." He pointed toward them. "Those weren't medical professionals at work. Those were neighbors scheming." The courtroom stirred, whispers rising like wind before a storm. Carla's face drained of color. Dean clenched his jaw, gripping the edge of the table as if to anchor himself. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight shift off my shoulders, not gone, but lighter. Truth had found a voice outside of mine. The judge rapped the gavel. "Order! This testimony will be entered into record. The credibility of these documents is now highly questionable." Relief warmed my chest. Rebecca leaned closer, whispering just enough for me to hear. "The tide's turning. Hold steady." After the hearing ended, she suggested we regroup somewhere less suffocating. We found ourselves at a small diner on the edge of town. The booths were cracked vinyl, the coffee thin but hot. It felt like a safe harbor after the courtroom storm. Rebecca stirred her cup, her eyes steady on me. They overplayed their hand. Once lies start to unravel, they rarely stop. Today proved that. I nodded, staring at the steam rising from my mug. The betrayal still cut deep, but for the first time, strength outweighed despair. "Harvey didn't have to speak," I said softly. "But he did." Rebecca placed her hand briefly over mine. "You're not alone anymore. Remember that." Later, when I returned to the motel, the night felt heavier again. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, flickering shadows across the parking lot. My car sat where I had left it, but something was off. Drawing closer, I froze. The windshield was smashed, shards glinting under the yellow light. A folded note was taped to the jagged glass. With careful hands, I pulled it free. The letters were bold, rushed, and threatening. "This ends now." The words burned in my mind. Someone wanted me silenced, maybe even gone. My fingers curled tight around the steering wheel as the cold air bit at my face. "They've lost in court," I muttered, voice low but steady. "So now they want me gone." The fight wasn't finished. It was only climbing higher. The courthouse hallway smelled like lemon polish and old paper. Benches creaked when people shifted. Faces I'd known for decades pretended to study the floor as I passed. Rebecca walked half a step ahead, her file tucked tight against her ribs. When the clerk called our case, the room stiffened in that way a room does when it expects a hanging and hopes it won't have to watch. Carla and Dean sat with their lawyer as if they were posing for a brochure, upright, practiced, comfortable in other people's trouble. Carla didn't look at me until the judge entered. Then she flicked her eyes over like I was a smudge to be wiped. The judge explained the petition in a voice that made no room for argument. Today was about control. If granted, my daughter would be entrusted with my finances, property, medical decisions, my signature reduced to scenery. The words sounded clinical, but what they meant was simple. A man could be pushed gently out of his own life and told it was for his safety. Carla's lawyer rose. He talked about concern and stability, the way people do when they're packaging a switchblade as a spoon. He handed up exhibits with plastic tabs, turned to the bench with clean, sympathetic lines rehearsed in the mirror. Miss Harlow seeks only to protect her father. Mr. Brandt has demonstrated lapses in memory, poor judgment, and an inability to manage basic affairs. Protect, lapses, poor judgment. The words landed like pebbles in a jar. Small sounds building toward something heavy. Carla stood to speak for herself. She folded her hands at her waist and softened her face, the way she used to when asking for a later curfew. "My father is lost," she said. "He's been wandering between places. He forgets things. He refuses help. I'm scared for him." She let her voice break on that last sentence. Dean angled his body so the judge could see him nod solemnly. It was a good performance. It would have fooled me, if I hadn't known the props. Rebecca rose without rustle. "Your Honor, we object to the petition as premature and unsupported. The exhibits rely on unauthenticated notes and contradictory timelines. We request to address those after the petitioner's direct statements." The judge gestured for her to proceed. Rebecca walked her through the papers, tapping dates with a pen that made tiny, polite sounds. The so-called medical summaries, unsigned, misdated, one with my name spelled with an extra S. The bank screenshots, cropped, missing the lines that showed who logged in. With each question, the slickness drained from Carla's lawyer's sentences. He started reaching for words the way a man reaches for his hat in a windstorm. I kept my jaw still. Anger is a bright light. Courts prefer lamps. Dean couldn't meet my eyes. He studied the edge of the table as if justice might be hiding there, small enough to fit in his pocket. The judge leaned back. "I'll hear further witnesses." A spare chair scraped. I didn't turn because I was afraid of naming hope by looking at it. Then the smallest voice in the room carried like a bell. "May I say something?" Maisie stood at the aisle, hands clasped. The sleeves of her cardigan tugged down over her knuckles. She looked toward the judge, not toward her mother. The judge measured the room, then nodded. "State your name." She did. Her cheeks were pink, but her chin was steady. "He's my grandpa," she said, and then looked right at me. "He remembers my birthday as June 15th. He always asks if my tea needs honey when my throat hurts. He knows the smell of Grandma's cinnamon bread when I try to bake it and pretend it turned out right. He's not what they're saying." Carla pushed her chair back. "Your Honor, she's a child." "Let her finish," the judge said. Maisie took a breath you could hear. "He's the only one who listens when I'm scared. He writes things down in a notebook. He showed me to make sure he doesn't mix up what I say with what I feel. If that's being forgetful, then I wish more grown-ups would forget like that." A silence settled that no lawyer could cut. The court reporter's keys went quiet. Even the ventilation seemed to wait. Rebecca only said, "No further questions." Carla's lawyer tried to recover ground with a question about manipulation, whether I had ever asked Maisie to say certain things. She shook her head, simple and clean. "He told me to be honest, even if it hurts him." Then she sat. The judge folded his hands. "I'll take the petition under advisement." He glanced from the exhibits to Carla to me to the small figure beside the aisle. "The court notes the minor's testimony as reflective of her observations and gives it weight appropriate to her age and familiarity with the respondent. Decision deferred." But something in the room had shifted, like a door opening somewhere you couldn't see yet, letting in a draft of ordinary air. When we stood, the legs of our chairs made a squeal that felt like the world was returning to sound. Rebecca touched my elbow. It was not comfort so much as calibration. "We're okay," she murmured. "Not finished." but okay. Dean steered Carla toward the corridor, a hand at her back like a stage manager moving talent off camera. She shrugged him off and stepped close enough that I could see the tiny quiver in the corner of her mouth. "If the court won't take it from you," she said softly, "I will." She smiled without teeth, like a curtain pulling back just enough to promise another scene. Then she walked away. Outside, the sky was the color of tin. Cars flowed through the intersection like they had appointments more important than people. Rebecca gathered her files and promised to draft a response. Harvey shook my hand with both of his, a farmer's grip that said the ground is still under us. Maisie pressed a folded napkin into my palm, as if we were passing secrets in church. On it, she'd drawn a small lighthouse in blue pen, a beam cutting through rain. Back at the motel, the bedspread scratched my wrists when I sat. The room was the same battered square it had been the night I was turned away, lamp with a crooked shade. TV muttering a parade of faces with no sound, heater clicking like a tired cricket. I opened the notebook and wrote down the date and the words the judge used, the way I always do. Then I wrote what Maisie said about honey and tea, and the lighthouse, and how a child's courage feels like a handhold in cold water. There are moments when a man takes stock like he's counting nails in a coffee can. What is left? A name still my own. A neighbor who tells the truth. A lawyer who respects the difference between strategy and cruelty. A granddaughter with a voice stronger than any affidavit. A house that is bricks and wood, yes, but also mornings of cinnamon and the soft thud of running feet in the quiet hours after the world goes to bed. A life that didn't end just because someone wanted to sell it. The phone buzzed once, unknown number, then no message. I laid it face down and studied the napkin. The beam cut across the paper, past the lines, past the ink, as if determined to land on something worth saving. At some point the hallway outside filled with footsteps and laughter, the sounds of people occupied with small, ordinary evenings. I turned out the lamp and let the room's dark settle around me like a coat taken from a hook that still remembers my shoulders. Her words were still there in the dark. If the court won't take it from you, I will. Maybe that was supposed to frighten me into surrender. Instead, it arranged my choices into a neat row. Be erased politely, or write back in ink the world can't wash. Morning would come. So would the next paper, the next hearing, the next chance to show a judge a blue pen lighthouse on a cheap napkin and a man who keeps his promises. The courthouse doors felt lighter that morning, though the chill of late autumn air pressed against my coat. I walked inside with my shoulders square, steadier than I had in weeks. The days of humiliation on porches, nights in dim motel rooms, the whispers that I was unfit, they all brought me to this moment. My steps echoed down the tiled hallway as if to remind me I was still here, inside. The room buzzed with restless energy. Neighbors had gathered, curious to see how the Brandt family feud would end. Carla sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, her jaw tight. Dean beside her looking less confident than usual. Rebecca gave me a small nod from across the defense table. That nod was enough. I wasn't walking into this storm alone. When the bank officials were called, the shift in the courtroom was almost visible. The first officer spoke plainly. Carla had accessed accounts without authorization, her digital signature logged on every withdrawal. Dean's name appeared on the transfer paperwork. The second witness, another bank employee, confirmed the documents Carla submitted contained forgeries. Dates didn't match. Notary stamps altered. The crowd stirred, the whispers growing into a low hum. I sat still, though inside, a swell of relief pressed against my ribs. Finally, truth wasn't just my word against theirs, it was fact. Carla's face tightened. She stood suddenly, her voice sharp, cutting through the murmurs. I was protecting him. The judge's gavel came down hard. Enough. Mrs. Harlow, sit down. His voice carried no sympathy. Carla glanced at Dean for support, but he leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. When pressed, Dean's voice betrayed him. I only helped with what Carla insisted on, he muttered. I didn't want trouble. He turned his back to her as if disowning her in that instant. It was over. Everyone could see it. When the verdict came, the words struck like a hammer, yet with a softness that eased into my bones. This court rules in favor of Mr. Lester Brandt. He retains full rights and independence. Petition denied. Further, given the evidence of fraud, the court refers charges against Carla Harlow and Dean Lasker to the district attorney's office. The gavel fell again, and the sound echoed in my ears like the final note of a long-forgotten song. Maisie rushed from her seat, arms wrapping around me with such force I nearly staggered. "I knew they couldn't take you away, Grandpa," she whispered, her tears dampening my collar. I held her tight, not for me but for her, to show her that truth, though bruised and battered, still stood tall. That evening, I walked through the front door of my modest home. The place felt smaller somehow, stripped of the clutter that once belonged to me, but it was mine again. The creak of the floorboards, the familiar draft near the window, even the scent of old pine from the dresser. They whispered welcome. I sank into the chair by the window, the same chair where I once held Evelyn's hand. "I lost my daughter's love," I murmured. "But I found something she tried to take, my dignity. And dignity, I realized, was the truest home of all." Later that night, I sat with pen and paper, writing what I wanted the world to know. "Family," I wrote, "isn't bound by blood alone. It's bound by respect, by the way we choose to honor one another. Guard what you've built, because silence does not mean weakness. Lies may run fast, but truth never loses its legs." As I set the pen down, the mail slid under the door. Among the envelopes was a letter from the local community center. They wanted me to mentor young men who lacked father figures. For a moment, I just stared at the letter, my hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from something I hadn't felt in a long while. Purpose. The battle with Carla and Dean was finished. Justice had been served. And though the wounds of betrayal would linger, something new waited for me beyond the courtroom walls. Not an ending, but a beginning. "All right," I said softly to the empty room, Evelyn's photograph smiling back at me from the shelf. "Let's get to work."